Hi, everybody. My name is Matthew Poes with Poes Acoustics, and I'm answering questions. So Michael Slaughter, who I think has been a viewer for a while, so thank you, gave $25 and had a question. And I'll just say, Michael, you did me. You did what I do a lot, and it's great because it's a good opportunity for us to talk about this in grander terms. You said, thanks for the videos. They're great. I have a question. Dirac and Odyssey, and most correction systems, I'm guessing, set all the channels to equal volume at the MLP, right? But aren't the surrounds and backs supposed to be minus 3 dB relative to the LCRs on all audio codecs except Atmos and maybe DTSX? And if that's the case, isn't it impossible on most receivers processors to level match the subs with both the LCRs and surrounds? If I'm not mistaken, most sum trim settings are global, meaning they can't be set for individual channels. So if a channel is minus 3 dB, it's impossible to also set the sub trim minus 3 dB for that channel alone. On most receivers, it's not possible to have sub-levels matched with the LCRs and surrounds if the surrounds are minus 3 dB. Am I right? This is a crisis. Well, actually, it's not as big a deal as you think it is, because what you need to do is actually set the channels the way you would for Atmos. Everything's equal. The processor has coding done already to compensate for the levels based on changing codecs. Those requirements are part of the codec. And so, no, you don't need to set it at minus 3 dB. You shouldn't be doing that. That probably would make the surrounds too quiet. You also mentioned like Atmos and maybe DTSX. The reality is the majority of content coming out for the last 5 years has been Atmos. Streaming is a little bit different, but also remember, streaming is being re-engineered in a way that does not conform to the original ideas of those, including, the cinema standard was minus 20 dBFS equals 85 dB. And there had been a push to kind of reduce that a little bit in homes to 82. TVs were something totally different. So TV shows, it was 75, something like that. And then all of a sudden with streaming getting more and more popular, they started to push a standard that really was minus 20 dBFS equals 78, 76, 75, 82, 81, 80, different numbers, but never 85, something lower than that. And I talked about that before. And I had a lot of conversations with folks well, what happens if you just stick to the old standard? And what they said was that if not for the loudness differences, of which are relatively minor, it doesn't really make a difference. And then you can just listen at the level that feels comfortable for you, understanding that if you get too quiet, you do lose information that would have been heard by the sound engineers. But the sound engineers are mixing on a system that has all the speakers at 85 dB. And anything going into streaming, like I said, is being remixed at this point because it needs to meet these new standards. They want consistency. They don't want you to go in. I mean, if you watch my YouTube videos, many of you have complained about the sound levels. And one of the things, and I've heard people say, you're a sound guy. How come you can't get it right? Remember, two totally different kinds of sound guys. The guys that do sound engineering in movies are not acoustics experts. And the guys that are acoustics experts are not sound engineer experts. Those are not the same skill at all. And it's not that I don't have the capacity to learn it. I just don't know it because it's not something I ever studied. But as I started to get into this topic, I started to understand better what was happening. Part of it I knew, which was that we just weren't raising the level enough. And I wasn't doing anything to compress the sound or anything like that. But it turns out YouTube is like TV, but worse. YouTube has decided that what they want the videos to look like is more like those infomercials you would watch late at night that were really, really loud with very little dynamic range. They want things pushed up. And the reason is because people are consuming content primarily on phones and tablets, not on TVs, especially YouTube. And I was recording stuff as if it was going to be sent to Netflix. I was recording it and then providing them on a dynamic range that's more consistent with a TV show, not a YouTube video. And I wasn't correcting enough. And in some cases, it would get even worse. In fact, we still aren't. We're still doing it more like a TV show. But then the difference, I guess, between a TV show and these YouTube infomercial level volumes and dynamic ranges is so dramatic. And so you'd have to turn the volume up and down quite a bit if you go back and forth between my video and other people's videos. And in some cases, it'll be hard to turn it up loud enough to overcome a lot of ambient noise, which I think is what people were complaining about. And really, a lot of that needs to be better handled. Netflix doesn't want you to have to do that. So they've created these standards that say like movies and TVs they can fall within a range. They don't have to be exactly the same, but they don't want them to be dramatically different either. And that way people aren't turning the volume up and down. So anyway, in terms of like the sub balance and everything else, don't worry. This is all being handled for you. Remember that the sub and like you're also probably thinking of it in terms of LFE levels and sub levels all being some global thing, but that's not really how it works. LFE is a completely separate channel, completely unrelated to bass management and bass levels. LFE is an effect channel that has low frequency content sent to it, and it's established at a certain level and is tied to the action on the scene that, as I said, the mix engineer already heard and got balanced out for you. The bass management is something that the mix engineer never heard because they weren't using bass management in the way that we use it when they were mixing. So bass management is taking the low frequency content at a given output level out of speakers that can't handle it and sending it to the subs. Well, if you make your left side surround speaker 3 dB lower, the low frequency content it's mixing into the sub is also 3 dB lower. So that's already been compensated for. The other thing that most people don't even realize that's going on there is that if you took all of the content's low frequency information, which is typically mono anyway, out of all of the channels and you combined it together and you stuck it into the sub, the bass levels would be way, way, way too high. So what happens is bass management is already reducing the bass levels to compensate for the number of channels that are going into it as well. So basically the answer to your question is this is already being handled. You don't need to worry about it. What you really want to focus on is making sure all the channels are properly balanced. What I will say, which I think is a bigger issue, is that assuming that the autocorrection system got it right is not always right. Even the best of them, like the Trinnov system, doesn't necessarily get the balance perfectly correct. I was at Foundry and we were listening to the system, which, I don't want to throw them under the bus. The system was very impressive. I think 99% of people who heard what we heard would have walked away totally impressed. But it was new. I mean, they were still doing construction. It had only had a rough calibration. They actually found issues that they had to fix after I left. I was working with them on fixing a small issue. But one of the things that Ben Goff had mentioned, which I thought was interesting, was he was saying that when you listen to the pans between the LCRs and the surround speakers, they're not consistent. So even though it's the same brand of speaker, they sound very similar, there was this shift happening and he just hadn't had a chance to fix it. He hadn't had a chance to go in, but like it had run through an optimizer stage. So it already, like Trinnov had already measured everything and tried to get it all right, but for some reason it didn't sound it. And I've heard this with Dirac, Odyssey. I hear it when people do manual calibrations, it's often a million times worse because what they're often doing is just doing like an A-weighted SPL meter reading at each speaker, if that, and then calling it a day because it was within a dB or so. And then you go and you look at the frequency response and you overlay it and you play pink noise between the channels and you listen and it's like, it doesn't sound right. So there is a lot of rebalancing that often needs to happen as part of the final calibration of a system. And so I guess my point here is that don't worry about this. Don't worry about this idea of like, the surrounds need to be a different level. You want to make them all the same. Worry about making sure they actually sound the same when you send pink noise to each channel, and content too. You want to watch content you're familiar with, but the key is just to making sure that when you switch back and forth, it doesn't sound like a major shift in sound quality or level. So I check it with an SPL meter. I mean, I use REW and a calibrated mic, but same concept. I check it by running sweeps and overlaying them. And then the final and most important check I do is actually listening back and forth. So anyway, I hope you found that helpful and that this helped you guys to improve your systems. Michael, don't worry about it. I obsess over stupid things all the time. Sometimes I like spend weeks testing things and thinking about things. And then in the end, I'm like, oh, right, this is totally unimportant. They've already addressed this. Or, oh, right, this is totally unimportant. It doesn't actually make any difference in sound, even if it does have some technical merit. Anyway, thanks for watching my videos. Please subscribe. The interactions are great. Even if you guys just do silly comments like thanks for the video, it actually makes a big difference. The donations are really helpful. I've talked about that many times before, so please keep doing that. Appreciate all you guys, and thanks for watching the channel.